Hello everyone and welcome to another video on this Model UN training series. In this video, we're going to talk to you about how to make a perfect draft resolution. How is it different from a working paper or a position paper and so on. So let's get into it. In a Model UN, you have two types of documentation that happens. One is your formal documentation and the other is the informal documentation. So a working paper and a position paper are informal documents. Why? Because a working paper is basically documentation of all the conversations that happened throughout the day from a perspective of a certain set of delegates. And a working paper does not have any specific format to write it in. Its major purpose of the working paper is so that you can use it as a reference in the end while writing your draft resolution. Because it's very difficult to remember all the arguments that were spoken on the first day, maybe on the second, third, or fourth day of the Model UN. And that's why you have your working paper. About a position paper again does not have a specific format, but the use of a position paper is so that you can mention your stance and your research and your ideas and present that to the executive board so that they have an idea to evaluate what was your mindset before you actually came to the MUN. And again, it does not have any specific format, and therefore it is not a formal document. Now, the formal documents that we have and the one that is mostly used in a United Nations conference as well as a Model UN is the draft resolution. Of course, you have other documents that are also legally binding, like a bill or a communique that is used in various other styles of parliamentary debate. But primarily, what we're going to talk about is the draft resolution. So let's get into it. So a draft resolution is a formal document. And why is it so important and how is it so formal as a document is because it has a very specific format that you need to follow. A draft resolution is voted upon using a substantive vote, that is a 66% vote or a two-third majority vote. And this particular document is legally binding and all member nations have to follow what is a part of this draft resolution uh, if it passes. That being said, what is the format and how do you go about writing an amazing draft resolution? There are three parts to it. The first part is the header, then the preambulatory clauses or the preamble, and then the operative clauses or your solutions that you have to offer to that particular concern. So let's now talk individually about how do we go about writing this. The first, you have the header. So whenever you write the header, make sure that the name of your paper is mentioned as the heading. And next to it, you have a particular iteration number. That number is very important because let's say in the future, if the same paper needs to be amended or the same agenda needs to be worked upon, instead of writing an absolutely new paper, the delegates can choose to just change that number and change the iteration of this particular paper. Next comes the name of the committee room where you're situated in, where you're seating in. Post that, you write down what exactly was the agenda that was being discussed to which this particular paper has been drafted. Then you go on to talk about the sponsors or authors. These are the delegates who have written this particular paper actively and have been the most important people so that they have brought in other members to join their block, but they are the ones who have actively written the paper. Then you go on to talk about, or you write the names of all the signatories. Now, signatories are all the delegates who are interested in discussing and acknowledging that paper in the committee room. It is not compulsory for them to say, to vote on that paper, but they are interested in debating and discussing that particular paper. Now, so that being said, you can be a author of only one paper in a committee room, but you can be a signatory of any number of papers that are presented in that room. Then the next part is the preambulatory part or the preamble. Now, the purpose of the preamble or the preambulatory part is that any particular reader who picks up this paper is able to understand why was that draft resolution made and what are the problems that we are solving. So your preamble should consist very clearly of what is the concern and whom is it concerning and why is it a concern, essentially. And then you can go on to write your operative clauses to that. That is what is the solution. But about a preambulatory clause, the first word that we use of the preamble is called a preambulatory clause. Now, obviously, because we are solving a particular concern that is either happening or has happened in the past, the suffix to the clause is always ends with ing or ed. Like if you check out in this particular picture, you will see that all these different examples of the preambulatory clauses that have been given to you, either they end with the word ing or they end with the word ed, because they're either happening or they have already happened. Now, preambulatory clauses, of course, cannot be changed because they have already happened or they're right now they're happening, right? That is why, since they cannot be amended, they do not have any kind of bullets. They don't have numbering, okay? That being said, preambulatory clauses are always separated by commas, and the clause word is usually underlined and written in italics. However, writing it in italics is not a hard and fast compulsion. Then we go on to talk about the operative clause. Now, operative clauses are your solutions that you are providing to the particular concerns, problems, issues that you have mentioned in your preambulatory clause. So in your operative clauses, because these operative clauses can be amended, they are always numbered. Because then later when you want to either modify or you want to delete or you want to add a particular clause, this numbering is comes in use to the delegates who will be reviewing your paper in the room. Then, operative clauses are always separated by a semicolon. That means this one particular solution is different from the other solution, but it is also a part of the same solution set to that particular concern. Then you go on to and have the suffix or the first word or the operative clause that we call it is always ends with s or es. Why? Because it's a particular action that we want the house to carry out, whether it is recommends or encourages or demands or requests. It's a particular action that we want to carry out in the future from this particular paper. That's why it always ends with S or ES. And finally, a full stop or a period comes only at the absolute end of the entire draft resolution. Why? Because the draft resolution should look like one complete sentence from the very first place where you have referred to which committee you are speaking about or speaking to the absolute end. It should sound like one complete sentence separated by these particular grammatical symbols. Okay. That being said, like I told you, I will now teach you how to write a perfect or a structure to write a perfect draft resolution. So first, be mindful for the format. So here you can see you have the format with you, right? So be very mindful of this format. Take a screenshot of this and keep it with you. Okay. Once you have the format ready, then you go on to prepare the structure of how you want to structure the various points that you have. Because all the delegates will give you different opinions of theirs. They'll give you different points that should be added to the draft resolution, right? So as authors of the paper, it's very important to structure what do you want and how do you want it. Once you have all your arguments structured, then you go on to now make your clauses and frame your clauses. How do you frame your clauses? Very simple. First, write down your particular clause in a very informal way. Okay. And once you have your informal clause, then from the entire bucket of operative and preambulatory clauses that you've seen on the previous pages, what you do is you pick up the clause that you feel is most appropriate and attach it to the start of your entire clause, and then you put it together, and that's where you have a beautifully well crafted preambulatory and operative clause. Now, be very specific when you're going to make your operative clauses. Why? Because operative clauses are solutions, right? So they need to be very specific. And operative clauses allow for sub clauses. So your first clause should be your main operative clause. After that, you go on to explain about how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, and by what's your timeline like. So all these are very important to mention as your sub clauses. And finally, once you're done making your entire draft resolution, that is where you go on to now check for grammatical errors. Have you forgotten to put a semicolon somewhere? Have you forgotten to put a comma somewhere? Have you put a full stop by mistake somewhere? Because it's only allowed at the end, right? Therefore, once you've done this entire spell check and you've done your entire scrutiny that your entire document is spick and span, you go on to ratify it from your chairperson and introduce it to the entire house. I hope you really liked this video. I hope you were able to learn how to make a perfect draft resolution. And if you need any more help, please feel free to reach out to me via email or my Instagram. It will be somewhere here. And even if you need training for your Model UN conference, please feel free to reach out to me and I will be more than happy to help you out. Till then, keep running and have a good one.